Hello crafty friends, welcome to today's video. Recently I watched an older video of Marion Emberson, and in it she used melted powder with embossing powder to create some resin-like elements for her cards and jewellery and things like that. And what she did was she took a tin foil case thing, put in a load of melted, well not a load, an amount of melted, which is basically an embossing powder. And then she added in some other embossing powders, some coloured embossing powders, heated it so it melted, and then you can pour it out and do things with it. And while she was doing it, I thought to myself, I wonder what would happen if you use melted with pigment powders. Can you colour the melted with pigment powders? So I've got melted in my little pie tin here. And I've got Peacock Indigo Blue Luscious Powder. So this has got mica in it, which means it's lovely and sparkly when you use it. I'm going to mix that in. I'm going to stir it in, get the dry powders to mix together. And then I'm going to melt it with my heat tool. So I'm going to put it on the highest setting. I'm going to crimp this slightly and use my reverse tweezers to hold this so I don't burn my fingers. So I'm going to heat it from underneath until it's melted. If you try and heat it from the top, that powder will just blow everywhere. So that has melted and the pigment powder has coloured the melted beautifully. What I'm going to do is make some enamel dots with this. I'm just going to give this another blast because it does cool and set quite quickly. And to make my DIY enamel dots, I've got a little spout there that I've crimped into that. And I can just drip some off. Now that's cooling and setting already, so I'm going to poke that back in there and heat it again. This is one of those reusable baking tray liner things that I got, I think, from Poundland, but you can make your drops on a silicone mat. You probably can even do them on a glass mat. So they've all cooled and set now. That was really quick. Some of these are not quite the shape that I'd like them to be, so I can pop them back in there and they will remelt. So I only want the ones that are circular. And as you can see, they come right off the craft mat really easily. And these are some that I made earlier, and all I did was put a spot of glue on the card and then put a enamel dot on top. Just a little bit. This is matte gel medium. This is just for demonstration purposes, obviously. I put them on a card in a pleasing arrangement. I did this one with a different colour of pigment powder. So you can make these kind of enamel dots in advance of wanting to use them. Just peel them off, put them in a little pot somewhere. And because this remelts whenever you heat it, you can keep these tins, so you don't need to throw them away. I've just written on the bottom what I melted in there. So that was Peacock. This one's crushed velvet. This one's going to be juicy plum. So I'll put a little bit of pigment powder in there. You don't need much. And then a generous helping of melted. Obviously, the more pigment powder you add to your melted, the stronger the colour will be. I didn't add a lot to this, so this one might be quite pastel. So that's melted nicely, but it is very translucent and I want something a little bit more opaque. So I'm going to put another dollop in and I'm going to stir it in with this stylus. I can clean this up afterwards. I'll give that a bit of a blast. I've made a nice blob there, and I'm going to push this wax seal stamp into it and just give it a few seconds to cool down. Right, I think that's probably cool enough. That's lifted off the craft mat perfectly. And I can gently take my stamp out of there, and I've got a beautiful shimmery shiny wax seal, and I prefer this method, I think, to using wax to do this, because I can colour this any colour I want using my Luscious powders, and that would look beautiful on the front of a card. This Luscious powder is called Rapunzel, and it's a beautiful gold. So I'm going to put quite a bit in there. So that's melted. What I want to do is pour it straight onto the front of a card blank and then press an embossing folder down into it. So I'm going to heat it while I pour. So that's splurged out in all sorts of different directions, and I'm going to keep this there until it's cooled down. And I think I got about as much as I could out of that one. I'll see if I can easily remove the embossing folder without damaging the card. There we go. So that has made a lovely embossed pattern on there. Now, what I found is the plastic of the embossing folder on here can dull the shine a bit. So I just give this a little bit of a heat. I put it on its lowest heat setting and gently waft the hot air over it, making sure not to melt it and lose any of the pattern. I just want to shine it up a bit. So that's brought the shine back beautifully. Obviously, you don't have to do this on the front of a card. You could do it onto your silicone mat or your craft mat or whatever you're using and peel it off. Again, it's something you could make in advance and have some on standby for when you want to add something to a card. So I think I might maybe add a little banner and a bit of foliage or a butterfly to this and a sentiment somewhere. This has warped the card a little, but once that's cooled and set, I just put that under a heavy book and it would flatten out a bit. So you definitely can colour your melted powder with Luscious pigment powder. But what if you haven't got, or you can't get access to melted powder? Well, I've tried all these techniques just using clear embossing powder instead of melted, mixing the clear embossing powder with Luscious pigment powder, and that works too. So if you've got some clear embossing powder, give these techniques a go. Add some pigment powder, melt it in a little tray, and then pour it and see what you can do with it. So I'm thinking this would be a lovely card. Add a little bit of glue to the back of this banner and this wax seal. Add a few drops of glue. Get some of my peacock feather. Not peacock feather, just peacock drops here. And there you go. I've created a little card today, clean and simple, using the melted and pigment powder. I love the depth of colour you can get with your pigment powders and melt it. And you get much the same effect with clear embossing powder and pigment powders. So don't worry if you haven't got the melted. If you want more ideas on things you can do with pigment powders, check out my Pigment Powder 101 series. There's a playlist linked down below. There's lots of videos there to give you plenty of ideas. Speaking of ideas, if you've gleaned any ideas from this video, do let me know in the comments, leave a thumbs up, subscribe, ring the notification bell, and see you back here very soon for another video. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.